and welcome to an interview hosted by Durham University Hong Kong Society. Today we're going to discuss the big reforms to be made in the current liberal studies curriculum. These changes include the adoption of a pass-fail system, have topics and lesson hours cut in half, and a newfound emphasis on national education. Today, Mr. Victor Kwok, who is the head of youth and education, will talk to us about this matter. The interview will be based on the Liberal Studies Research Report of OHKF, which had been published in July 2020. The report supports and illustrates the changes the subject should go through.
So to begin with, the report pointed out inadequacies in the current syllabus under 5 interrelated aspects, namely the curriculum framework, assessment, teaching materials, teaching process, and articulation. So before we discuss each point in depth, could you give us a brief idea of what the inadequacies and recommendations are?
Before we talk about inadequacies, we first need to know why the subject exists and whether it is able to fulfill its original purpose. So, liberal studies was established as part of the 2000 education reform, the big overhaul of the Hong Kong education system. Part of the purpose is because at that time, people have a strong division between arts and science streams. The students, art students don't really know about science and vice versa. So they want to have a more holistic curriculum where there is a subject that connects different disciplines into one. So that was the original purpose. Another purpose of that at that time is that they feel that students are very burdened by examination pressure. So they study hard and so-called 死讀書to say, at that time people feel that the curriculum should become more flexible. People should have more flexibility to explore topics of interest, so they reduce the number of subjects. But this comes at a cost, because by reducing the amount of subjects, you also confine the amount of science and art subjects that you can have in the curriculum. So that increases the need of having a holistic subject within the curriculum. So that was liberal studies, how it came up. And obviously, and then the world changes, people focus more and more on, for example, critical thinking skills, media literacy and all that. So that came into focus and eventually become the liberal studies that we know of today. Our big question is whether the current curriculum setting and the assessment methods are able to support these original aims of liberal studies. And our answer is there are inadequacies. So the curriculum, we find it broad because you have, as we pointed out in our earlier report in September, 12 very much overarching topics, very broad topics, put within effectively 168 hours of teaching and learning. It's hard to attain sufficient depth for people to do analysis, to discuss, and if possible, even to go for more experiential learning activities, which we understand will elaborate later. On the other hand, the assessment is a problem because, as I mentioned, one of the original purpose of liberal studies is really to make learning more flexible, more lively. Has that been attained? People are still memorizing examination frameworks. People are still, undergoing a huge amount of examination pressure. That's not what liberal studies wanted in the first place. So I think that characterizes the inadequacies that we mentioned in the first place. So I think we've recommended a few overarching recommendations, but like you mentioned, changing the grading system to pass-fail to relieve some of the pressure, changing the curriculum to really focus on a fewer amount of topics but in greater depth, to focus, to strengthen the vetting textbooks and teaching materials, etc. So these are our recommendations, and obviously we can talk more in detail.
Okay. So, in regards to the general framework, the Foundation recommended that authorities should help teachers and students to explore in-depth exploration of issues using an experiential learning approach, which you've just mentioned. So, what do you mean by an experiential learning approach?
Yeah, that's a great question, because just think of it. Let's say in liberal studies, because the topics are so overarching, right? Let's say you talk about environmental protection. Can the students actually go to the mangroves to see for themselves, or go to wetland parks to see for themselves? How does it actually work? Do you think they have enough time in the curriculum setting? The answer is obvious, no. And the reason is multifold. Teachers are busy, students are busy, they are burdened by a huge amount of curriculum in a short amount of time, all that. So we do want to, have fewer topics, but longer hours for each topic comparatively, so as to kind of create some space for these experiential learning activities.
Okay. So previously it was mentioned that there will be a compulsory study tour to mainland. Would you consider that as an experiential learning approach?
They didn't say it's compulsory. They say it's encouraged, as far as I know, in the EDB announcement. It certainly qualifies as, what we mentioned as experiential learning. If we learn about technology, let's say, we go to Tencent and Alibaba and see for ourselves how things are done. We go to industrial sites to see how Manus planes are being assembled in Dajia, for example. These are experiential learning activities, and I'm quite sure students will find it fun. Politics aside, right? Yeah. People will find it fun. They see for themselves what are the latest technological developments, how are things put together, how can I learn to put things together. These are things that are perhaps even more critical in the upcoming societal development.
On the same issue, the Foundation recommended that to provide two study options in liberal studies so that students taking humanities subjects can learn more about science and vice versa. But offering such choices may also mean that students studying humanities subjects would simply not choose the science option because they excel better in humanities. So in this case, how could the aim to strike a balance between arts and science still be achieved?
I think what we are recommending is to encourage students studying in science subjects to select the arts option, and vice versa. So the people who select the art subjects to select the science option. Whether to make it mandatory is a EDB's call. But we do want to encourage this kind of selection. The reason why is because we, like you mentioned, we want to attain a relative balance in the overall curriculum setting, not in liberal studies itself, but as a part of the whole new senior secondary NSS curriculum. So we do want students to be exposed to some art subjects and some science subjects, and like I mentioned, we don't want students to just study, just position themselves as art students or just position themselves as a science student. So I think this is what we wanted through this reform, and I understand the EDB hasn't announced details on how the curriculum reform will go yet. So we do want to advocate and push for changes in that direction.
Okay, and the education guru seems to have followed the Foundation's recommendation in implementing a pass-fail system. So how does this grading system ensure impartiality and promote students' high-order thinking skills?
I think there is two parts to this question. I think I have a different answer to impartiality and high-order thinking skills. I think high-order thinking skills is we feel that the aims of the subject, which one of the most critical thing, the objective is to build higher order thinking skills. It's not attained under the current assessment framework merely because people are still, memorizing frameworks for exams. People are still subject to a huge amount of examination pressure. That's not that's not the environment that can cultivate high order thinking skills. So I think bringing it to a pass-fail arrangement does relieve some of that examination pressure and leave more space for thinking. But impartiality is another thing, because people, it's hard to judge thinking skills, right, to start with. It's not like mathematics. You calculate either you're right or you're wrong. There's no right or wrong answer in many regards in higher order thinking skills. So how do we judge that? And when you bring in teachers to judge, what does it mean by level 3 high order thinking skills? What does it mean by level 4 high order thinking skills? It doesn't mean anything. So we do have a problem with that, and we feel that this can be tackled by that's where the impartiality that we described came from. There's no way to eliminate impartiality, because after all, scores are given by human beings. There is no way to eliminate impartiality, but there is a way to lessen the amount of impartiality that goes into the way students are admitted into university. Because, like I said, level 2, level 3, level 4 to level 5 double star, it makes a huge difference in whether you are admitted into a certain university degree, right? If you are bringing a pass-fail system, then the amount of differences created by that impartiality decreases. So that's what we are aiming at.
Okay. So moving on to the next question. In a recent interview with the political assistant to Secretary for Education, Jeff Sibb, he mentioned that the Education Bureau discourages the use of textbooks to implement an issue inquiry learning approach. However, a volunteer screening scheme was imposed to review the books, in which the foundation sort of advocated the government to do so, and by, I would say, publishing the vetting guidelines. Yet, don't you think that this method might make it more impractical to reduce the reliance on textbooks, as teachers would rather rely on the so-called accurate information determined by the government to prevent students from utilizing the so-called false information?
I think we have to clarify or the reason and the solution here, because it's kind of reversed it's a question you just pointed out. Because what we have done in our study is we are fully acknowledging the fact that EDB started off this subject by discouraging textbooks. We, in partnership with Lingnan University, did a study and surveyed about 500 plus teachers and principals. We asked them, are you still using textbooks for studies? What are the main teaching materials that you're using? About 87% chose textbook as one of the main teaching materials. So despite that discouragement from EDB for 10 years, nearly 90% are still using textbooks as the main teaching material. So that is a problem, right? That means what the government is advocating has not come true, or what they are thinking is not quite the case in practice. So we have to solve that. And when the teachers are actually using those textbooks in great majority, but the textbooks are not being held to standards that are felt to be appropriate as a source of teaching materials, and that creates an issue. So textbooks, there is advantages and disadvantages to using textbooks, right? On one hand, it's more structured learning, it's more put together. At the same time, you feel that it's more flexible and all that. But I think our recommendation in that case is a response to what's happening on the ground, rather than trying to encourage teachers to use more textbook, because they're already using it, and we are just trying to have a practical solution for them to have since they're already using it, to have higher quality teaching materials.
Okay. So this is not necessarily to reduce the reliance, but mainly just to...
No, it's because of their reliance on
Okay,
textbooks,
okay.
rather than to reduce their reliance on
Okay. In the research report, it was stated that the government could still compile an online database that recommends edifying learning materials and review the content regularly. Do you think that this database would be used widely? As it was stated that in a survey the foundation did was 84% of the teachers believe that the online sources provided by the Education Bureau was of little to no use, whereas 39% of them were actually using social media as a primary teaching material.
I think there's two survey figures
Yes.
you pointed out. The first one that you said, people found EDB's compiled materials not very useful. That is I think the reason that we say the EDB should do a compilation of what's available in the marketplace, because the attractiveness of EDB compiled materials, as shown by our survey, is considerably less than what is compiled by newspapers, magazines, external vendors, essentially. So the role of EDB, we feel, should not be the one who seeks to provide each and every line that are being used in the lessons, because teachers are not using it anyway. So their role, I think, should be more of a curator of these kind of materials to put together what is already available on the internet. But another thing you just pointed out is the reliance on social media, which obviously has, I think, with all due respect, right, there are inaccuracies in what was reported. Not in every outlet, but in some outlets. I think the EDB's role in that case, they cannot censor, right? They cannot censor media outlets, right? That's not their role, and nobody can. And what they can do is really to compile what is available, is what is already published. They pick what they feel is accurate, is objective, is suitable for the purpose of liberal studies, put them together. So EDB is not actually writing the materials, so don't get me wrong on that one. Because, as I said, EDB's ability to write attractive materials is severely limited. So the role instead we feel should change.
So the OFHK has proposed to publish teaching manuals which outline the knowledge and the skills teachers should possess, and offer feedback from regular inspections as a way to provide more support. So can you explain how these regular inspections would work?
I think it's nothing new. Regular inspections on schools and teachers are something that the EDB always do. It's part of the I think the annual cycles. I'm not the expert of the logistics, but every year, every 5 years, every 3 years, they have people, inspectors sent to schools and to see how the teaching and learning practices are being done. So I think the EDB does have a role in ensuring teaching quality. I think with every change in curriculum, especially with the overhaul and the subject that was announced, there is an implication to teachers, right? Teachers need to be updated. What changed in the curriculum? What was some of the new focuses, some of the new curriculum points that EDB wants to bring to students? They need to be trained and retrained from time to time. And it's not just about the current reform, it's more of a continuous process that teachers need to continuously get developed and redevelop and upgrade themselves. And that's true for any industry anyway. So I think having EDB to clarify what is required for a liberal studies teacher is useful, because even 10 years after liberal studies was established, people still have very different thoughts about what it should entail. So I think it helps. And at the same time, as I said, inspections are nothing new anyway.
Oh, We were just asking because it's a reform, so we would need a lot more change taking place in the classroom. So that's why we were wondering how would it differ from normal inspection.
I don't feel the inspections should differ from normal practices, but I feel that once the EDB clarifies what it takes to be a good liberal studies teacher, I think they should align their practices to what they themselves have published about a teaching manual or what it takes to be a teacher.
Also, you mentioned that the LS reforms is a large part of it, contributes to a more holistic approach where humanities students can access science subjects and vice versa. But then this foundation also suggested that the subject's mandatory nature contradicts its framework design. So
I think we should clarify on that point because I'm not 100% sure of your question on that regard. It's not the mandatory nature that contradicts its aims. It's rather the current assessment framework or the current rigid frameworks that contradicts with the original design. We advocated in our report to remain or for this subject to stay as a mandatory core subject in the new senior secondary curriculum, as opposed to some what we may hear from some other politicians. We feel that it's very important because, for example, critical thinking skills, higher order thinking skills, we feel these are important qualities for the 21st century. We feel that this subject should remain as one of the core subjects. So that itself is not a contradiction to the subject aims. In fact, we feel that the subject aims are so important, to have a knowledge base, to be able to think, to actually analyze, to learn independently. All these aims are critical, and that's why having an independent and having a mandatory subject is important to attaining these aims. But on the other hand, reforms need to be made and is currently being made on the way this subject is being taught and the way this subject is being assessed, which we think will help the subject develop and align to the original aims that was penned out 10 years ago.
So after we talked about all the recommendations, it is possible that not all of them would be taken into account by the Education Bureau when drafting the reform. So what other actions had the foundation taken to ensure that the issues mentioned would be attended to apart from publishing this research report?
I think it's quite standard in our policy advocacy practices that before and after publishing the report, we actively engage with stakeholders in the society, principals, teachers, and as well as other education experts, professors, government officials, etc. And that is true before and after publishing our report. And obviously, we also actively visit different stakeholder groups and to exchange our views with, for example, legislative council members, which may have, everybody have different views on liberal studies. It's a fairly divided topic, I think it's fair to say. And it's important then for us to try and pull together different stakeholders because we want to create a chorus, or we want to create a way for different views to come together and to become something more constructive. And I think that's part of our advocacy process.
So while details are still to be confirmed by the Education Bureau, to what extent do you think that the upcoming curriculum reform would be able to address the issues based on the given information?
Like we said, many of the details are yet to be announced, and the Curriculum Development Council has a lot more work to do to actually fix, if we are to trim the curriculum, for example, what topics should remain, what should be the emphasis, etc. How do we prioritize different things? I think I'm hopeful because I feel that it's sort of in the right direction, and in line with what we published as well, as you pointed out. So that's all I can say, because I don't actually know the exact details. So it's in the right direction, and we will stay hopeful, and I think the other side is we continue to engage in different stakeholders and to advocate for what we feel is the right direction to go.
In the policy address speech, one of the initial aims of the liberal studies course is to teach students how to analyze contemporary issues in a rational manner. Do you agree with the Secretary for Education, Kevin Young, in removing the coverage of ongoing current affairs? Or do you think that such a removal would defeat its purposes?
I think we have to be a little bit specific in the terms used. I don't think he said remove. What he is saying is some of the hot topics that are not yet that have not undergone sufficient consolidation in the society. Perhaps that's one of the best topics to teach. But for me, if you ask me personally, I feel it's hard to draw a line. If you go to the point where you say, I remove the contemporary issues, what means by contemporary issues? It's 30 years ago, something 30 years ago. Is that a contemporary issue? It's hard to define. I think the line is really not on the timeline, so to speak. It's more on whether there is sufficient historical, cultural, social background that comes with the particular issue that you're teaching to sufficiently offer depth and that breadth to the students, so that they can thoughtfully analyze, perhaps criticize, and to offer their own views on a particular issue. So I think if you talk about, let's say I talk about the Paris Climate Agreement, I don't see any reason why it cannot be taught. It came through a couple of years ago. It's still a current issue. U.S. is opting in and out, and I don't see but it's very recent, right? But I don't see a reason why it cannot be taught. It's on environmental protection, something that everybody in the world cares about. Is on a critical topic for the social development that is ongoing and critical to our sustainable planet Earth. I think so it really depends on an issue by issue, and you look at whether it's important, whether it's urgent for our planet, whether it's important for having that discussion in order to have that awareness. So I think that should be how you decide whether a topic should be included in the curriculum.
Okay. So we'll move on to the last question, which is something more general. So some has pointed out that the subject has become a political scapegoat of the recent social unrest, which led to its reformation. What is your view on this matter?
Well, I won't say scapegoat, because that's a very heavyweight word to use. It has certainly been politicalized if you look at it, right? It's a subject in a certain stage of education, the senior secondary, the 3 years, within an education spectrum, which is one of the topics in the society, and one of the stages in there, and one of the subjects in there. So technically it's a very niche topic, but the way it aroused so much political interest is quite unfortunate, let's say. But then I think the view that we have taken on this matter is that we don't want to be political in the way we analyze and the way we put out views. We want to be independent, we want to be thoughtful, we want to be reasonable in the way we speak about this subject. And that's why in all matters that we have covered just now, I wasn't talking about, there's too many political issues, there are too many current affairs, there's too many, wrong political ideologies. I'm not talking about all that. I think it's important to be responsible and look at the curriculum, the assessment, I think the building blocks of the subject. Whether and holistically consider whether this subject is able to attain the aims that the reformers of education have pointed out 10, 20 years ago, and I think that is our approach.
Okay. So on this note, this interview has come to an end, and I hope you guys, like the views, will help our students gain a more in-depth understanding of the LS reforms. And on behalf of the Durham University Hong Kong Society, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to Mr. Kwok. Really thankful that you were able to take the time out of your busy schedule to answer our questions on Hong Kong's impending changes and help set a cornerstone for our students to enrich their knowledge. And I wish the best of luck for you and your future endeavors.
Thank you.